What is a modal? A modal is a word that comes before the main verb. A modal gives a verb extra meaning, such as obligation, ability, or possibility. Modals of advice are used to give a suggestion for the present or the future. Modals of advice include should, ought to, and had better. The modal should is the most common modal of advice. For example, you should study for your test. The modal ought to is more formal than should. For example, she ought to submit her application today. The modal expression had better has a slightly stronger meaning than should and ought to. For example, we had better arrive early to get a seat. Modals are always followed by a base verb. A base verb is a verb with no ending added to it. A base verb has no s, ed, or ing ending. In positive sentences, we can use should, ought to, or had better, plus a base verb. My friends should register for the class before it fills up. You ought to leave the cookies in the oven a bit longer. Remember that ought to isn't very common in North American English, but if you use it, you can reduce it to oughta when speaking quickly. You ought to leave the cookies in the oven a bit longer. I had better remember to call my parents tonight. Did you know that you can also contract had to apostrophe D? I'd better remember to call my parents tonight. Or even drop had completely in casual spoken English? I better remember to call my parents tonight. In negative sentences, we can use should not or had better not, plus a base verb. Note that ought not to is very formal and almost never used. He should not eat too much before his workout. When speaking quickly, should not contracts to shouldn't. You had better not walk down this street late at night. When speaking quickly, had contracts to apostrophe D. You'd better not walk down this street late at night. We can also drop had in negative sentences in informal spoken English. You better not walk down this street late at night. For questions, the modal should is commonly used. We almost never use ought to or had better in questions. To form a question, the modal should is followed by the subject noun or pronoun and a base verb. Should my brother apply for this job? Should she wait after eating before she goes swimming? Look at the sentence and the modal and verb in parentheses. Make a positive sentence, negative sentence, or question for each one. Don't use a contraction. For example, they had better not be late for class. Now you try. Should we bring anything to the party? He ought to apologize for being rude. My neighbors had better not play loud music tonight. You should not scroll on your phone all night. Should I ask him for advice? Thanks for watching.